Hello, my name is Tracy Schroyer and I am a breast cancer survivor. I am actually making this video after the fact of the appointment that I had, but I wanted to go back and recap, as is most of the series that I have recorded to date, of different appointments that I had, different experiences I had, because I believe that this was really helpful to me in finding some of these on YouTube, and talking to people about their experiences, to get insight and know what to expect when I was walking into a situation or an appointment, and to kind of think through how things might impact me and just to know what to think about. So, on this particular video, I wanted to share with you information about my genetics testing and a little bit about my family background and the cancer we've seen in my family, as well as information I got from the genetics specialist, the genetics counselor that I talked to, and how that whole process ended up happening. So, just to start with, when I went, it was after my ultrasound, a couple days after my ultrasound, I had gone to a nurse practitioner to talk to her. It was about an hour before my biopsy. And she was the one that had told me at the time, prior to my biopsy, that they were pretty positive it was cancer. And she explained to me why, some of the different aspects of the tumor and the mass that they found in my breast. And she had let me know at that time that they were going to set me up with a genetics counselor because, since I am 42, typically she said it's like under 45. So she kept calling me young, which I just wanted to hug her. So she said, since I am under 45, with breast cancer, they go ahead in my situation and my health, insurance and the company, everything, uh, or the health insurance that I have, they go ahead and do genetics counseling. So I wasn't quite sure what to expect. Um, I had some exposure to genetics counseling about 10 years ago. So, I'll kind of tell you a little bit about my family history and kind of what we've experienced. So, you have insight into what I was walking into with this genetics counseling. And I'll let you know some of my expectations of what I thought it would turn out to be, some of the fears that I had, and then what actually happened and when I got the results. So when I went in to see the genetic counselor, it was probably within a week. I want to say a week to week and a half, after that appointment and having my biopsy. It may have been even sooner, but I want to say it was at least a week. So I went in. It's a building right next to my hospital. Um, Pretty much the same building. It was like the first floor, and I had been on the third or fourth floor to do the biopsy. But I went in and went back, and it was the same area. They had the genetics counseling in the same office that the radiation stuff was in. So I went in, sat down, and it wasn't like I had to wear a hospital gown or anything like that. Sat down in like an office setting at a little table and a couple chairs, with the genetics counselor. And she explained to me, what her role is, what they're looking at, and how all of this works. She actually gave me, a really good guide on, it's called a resource for hereditary breast and ovarian cancer, and it's through Ohio Health, who my insurance is through. And in this, it was really interesting because it talks about how, so I'll just read it to you. Most cancers, 70 to 80%, are sporadic or by chance. They're not inherited and cannot be passed to your children. Since cancer is common, some families can have a few members with sporadic cancers, so they're not related at all, which seems so weird that there isn't any kind of relation. But it also talks about how about 15 to 20% of cancers are familial. In these families, we see more cancers than we would expect to occur by chance, but they're not clearly hereditary. This may be due to minor genes interacting with shared environmental exposures, which creates an increased risk for cancer. Very little is known about the cause of cancers in these families. And only 5 to 10% of cancers are hereditary. So when a person has inherited a copy of a cancer susceptibility gene with a mutation from one parent and a working copy of the same gene from the other parent, he or she has an increased risk of developing cancer. So basically, what the genetic counselor told me is that there is a very small chance, she said probably 5 to 10%, just when we finished talking and going through and kind of mapping out for my family and what we've had, 5 to 10% that, sorry, I just got a text about a delivery. 5 to 10% chance that it was hereditary. So there was a 5 to 10% chance that they would find anything in the blood test that they sent off to look at genetic mutations. So I want to back up a little bit. So about 10 years ago, it was exactly 10 years ago in 2010, a cousin of mine who had gotten breast cancer, she had gone to do some genetic counseling because her mother had cancer and had metastasized. It was breast cancer, had metastasized, and she ended up passing away. And as well as, and her mom is my father's sister. But my father also had 2 other sisters who had different types of cancer. One had melanoma, and she had passed away in her mid-30s. The other aunt had passed away of bone cancer when she was 18. The aunt that I mentioned with the cousin, I believe she was mid-40s when she passed away. So 3 aunts, and there's also 2 boys, so my dad and my uncle. So what had happened is after my cousin had gotten tested, they found a genetic mutation, and I believe the way you pronounce it is Li-Fraumeni. And the Li-Fraumeni genetic mutation, at that time, there were just about 400 cases worldwide of this mutation. And there's certain different requirements to meet this mutation that you see in families for somebody to even get tested for it. So they had to do with the different types of cancers in the family, the young age at onset, and maybe 1 or 2 other criteria to fit that. So my cousin had gotten tested. They tested for that gene mutation. They found that she had it. Weren't able to test those 3 aunts that passed away. It was way after that time frame. But what they were able to do is, from my cousin finding that, is have my uncle and my dad get tested to see if they carried that Li-Fraumeni gene, because if they did, they could likely pass that on to their children. So me, my sister, my brother, and my cousins. So my dad and my uncle went and they got tested to see if they had that gene mutation. And thankfully at that time, they both, they did not have the gene mutation. So at that time, it was really a relief for me. I did not have to go get tested at that time, because if my dad did not carry that, he would not have been able to pass it on to me. My sister did go get tested at that time, and just timing and everything, and she did not show signs of having that gene mutation as well. So that was like a big sigh of relief for our family to know that that was not passed on. There are other cousins from my aunts that still need to be tested. I think age range, they were trying to wait until they were a little bit older. At the time when my aunts had passed away, they were a little bit younger. So some more testing to go on in the family to see if they have that gene, and especially if they have children, if they pass it on, but also what preventative things that they can do. So just getting tested, getting different, if you think about you may need to get a mammogram sooner because you have that. There's certain preventative things that you can do to stay on top of that. So at that time, like I mentioned, my dad did not pass that on, or he did not have it, so he could not pass it on. So it was, and so I'll tell you another thing too with my immediate family is when my mom she was 29 and 30, it was that age range. I do remember her 30th birthday and pictures from her being bald. But so when my mom was 29, 30, that age range, that is when my sister, she had gotten pregnant with my sister. And when she had my sister, she delivered her, and there was, I don't know if I'm saying this exactly right, but I believe it was some of the placenta was left. in, and that was cancerous. It's called choriocarcinoma. So choriocarcinoma. So that's the kind of cancer that my mom had. My mom went through chemo, um, and I remember seeing pictures in the album of my sister had just been born, and my mom had lost her hair through chemo, and they called them the hair races. So as my sister was, getting her hair in as a baby, and my mom back from chemo. And at that time, I believe my mom said I was kindergarten, would come, and I have kind of a fear of hospitals, just from remembering going to meet her and seeing her in the hospital and things like that. So I was worried not only from the aspect of, my dad's side of the family, and, you know, but, 10 years ago that was relieved. But also thinking about my mom, but I've done more research and looked into, and even my mom had told me there's like a 2% chance of even getting choriocarcinoma. And I had looked up, it's not hereditary. So the likelihood of having a cancer because of her having that was extremely low, if existent at all. So walking in, I was a little afraid of the genetics counseling just because of knowing all this. And I remember having a conversation with my dad's mom and my aunt and uncle. And I had a real fear of, what if I go and do the genetics testing and they find this genetic mutation for this Li-Fraumeni, and somehow something was wrong when they tested 10 years ago? Because in my mind, that unraveled a lot of things from, I have two girl cousins from my uncle who are young and beautiful. Shout out to you too. And worried about what does that mean for them and what do they need to start doing and preventative, and just that fear that starts to creep in. And I think I felt that a little when I talked to my aunt and uncle and my grandma. So what if something, you know, uh, maybe it skipped, I don't know. And, what are the possibilities? Because there's so few, I mentioned like about 400 families worldwide that have that syndrome and that genetic mutation. I think now they're up to a little over 600 in more recent studies for that. But still, you don't know everything about it. So there could be something that's a little different or something like that. So that was a fear of mine. When I did talk to the genetics counselor, she said the good thing is that in the last 10 years, things have come so far from the time that, my dad and my uncle and my sister were tested, that she said at the time when they did it, it was so expensive, and you typically only tested that gene that you knew about. So at that time, they would have tested the three of them with just for that genetic mutation on the Li-Fraumeni syndrome. Hold on just a second. All right, had to pause that, had a delivery show up. So the genetic counselor was saying, 10 years back that it was really expensive to just do even one, to search for one gene mutation. You had to know more specifically that you could have that, evidence of that. So it's come a long way in the last 10 years. So she said what they would do is I would go to the lab, which was thankfully in the same building, and they would draw a couple vials of blood and send it off. And they would test for, she looked at the sheet, and there's different, based on your family and your history, and they kind of map all of that out. And not only what cancers have been in your family, but different things like maybe heart disease or diabetes, different things like that. They kind of look at some of that stuff. So she had they were testing, I think at the time it was like it was between 24 and 26 different gene mutations that were possible. This included, there's two BRCA genes, the BRCA1 and BRCA2, because of my being diagnosed with breast cancer. Excuse me. So they were testing for all of those gene mutations if I had those show up within the blood test that they had done. She said typically it takes 2 to 3 weeks to get the results back, and that she would call me as soon as possible once she got the results to let me know. So one of the things that I felt I felt like my decision for what surgery I was going to have, whether I would have the lumpectomy and followed up with a radiation treatment or a double mastectomy, was at that time, it was a lot of it was dependent on the genetics. So if my genetics came back that I did have some kind of mutation, and what happens if you have some kind of mutation, there is more preventative things that you would do. You're watched a lot more carefully, but there's also a higher risk or a certain percentage risk of developing other types of cancers. So one thing that she had shown me within this booklet is that if I did come back with a BRCA1 or BRCA2 mutation, if and between ages of 40 or 50, within 10 years, it's likely that there was 11 to 13% chance that I would get another breast cancer. Within 25 years, 44 to 49% that I would develop another kind of breast cancer. Um, and then they also talk about associated cancer. They don't list them all, but one that she kind of pointed out is ovarian. So if you have the BRCA1 or 2 gene, the general population, it shows, and this is as of studies at that time, could change. It depends on the population, all of that. So definitely not a solid number for everybody. It's just as of that point in time and everything. But for ovarian cancer, the general population has a 1.5% chance of getting ovarian cancer. If you have BRCA1, it's 39 to 63%. So you're at a higher risk of developing certain types of cancers. So you can do different things that are more preventative. So for some of this, like ovarian, maybe it's going and getting your ovaries removed or a total hysterectomy or whatever that looks like. Whatever's the right move, based on your conversation with your doctors and the team. But just knowing what those risks are and what you might face later on down the line. Not to say that there's not any percent chance if you don't have any gene mutation as well, because I had those conversations, which I'll share with you in other videos, about if I don't do radiation, if I don't do chemo, here's the percentage possible that I could develop, another breast cancer, within 5 to 10 years, or another type of cancer in my body within a 10-year time frame, that kind of thing. But it just could be a little bit higher or quite a bit higher for different kinds of cancers if you have a gene mutation. So my thought at the time when I did the genetics testing is I'll wait to get the genetics testing back. And in my last video, I mentioned when I talked to my breast surgeon, the thought was to go forward with a lumpectomy, a breast reduction, which I could get done with the plastic surgeon, and followed by radiation treatments. Wasn't too looking forward to radiation. That was kind of scary, but that was my thought at the time that I left the breast surgeon's office. So when I left the genetic counselor's office, my thought was, okay, based on my genetics testing, when I get the results back, I will, if I don't have any gene mutation, I'll continue forward with the lumpectomy and the radiation. If I do have a gene mutation of any sort, then I will opt to do the double mastectomy instead. And there is, and numerous doctors tell you this, there is no difference whether you do the lumpectomy or the double mastectomy in your chances of cancer coming back, the breast cancer. In a woman's mind, and in my mind at that time, I could tell you from my experience, there's a higher level of comfort to do the double mastectomy and to know that you don't have that tissue, and it feels like a higher probability is what basically I'm saying. So my thought at the time when I left the genetics counselor, had the blood test done, is that I'll wait to get those results and I'll go from there. So I'll share with you in my next video about my appointment with the plastic surgeon and what he said about the options that I had, what we could do, and some of the questions that I asked him, as well as what my thoughts were when I left the plastic surgeon's office, because it changed a little bit within a few days after I left the plastic surgeon's office. So I'll share that with you in the next video. So thank you for listening in, and I'll talk to you soon.